Well, hello, everybody. Joe Steinke here with Soul of the Shepherd, with my friend Chris Clausen and my other friend, David Achata. We're here hosting an author interview again with one of our authors from the Soul of the Shepherd website, and is being featured also in a series in our online community. And for you that are part of the Soul of the Shepherd online community, these unique author interviews are exclusive to this space. And we love to just explore the different kinds of development questions and spiritual formation questions and motivations that underscore the lives of our authors. And this is our space to do that. And so you can get to know them a bit better and maybe just hear a little bit more nuance of the kinds of things that they are writing about, told in more of a personal way. So welcome, David.
Thank you. Been looking forward to it all day.
All right. It's great to have you. David, why don't we're going to just start with a question um, that I'll ask regarding telling us a little bit about your journey into discovering your voice as a writer. What's that been like for you in your life development journey? And how did you get comfortable and maybe a bit fluent with your voice as a writer?
I think it started when I was a theology student. You know, you're required to talk in front of people a lot. And then pastoring, all the sermon writing. Um, but there came a point where I just didn't have time or interest in writing everything out like I used to. And I just started being honest and speaking from the heart. And I think that journey began probably about 10 years ago when my mother died. And I was just so exhausted from the grief and the caregiving. And I just sat down and started writing in my journals, just full on honesty with what was in there. And I didn't intend for that to become a book. A friend of mine who was in the publishing industry said, "Hey, what are you writing? Can I see it?" So I shared it, and she said, "You got to make this into something." So a couple years later, like 6 or 7 years later, I took all those journals and went through them and tried to weed them together in a way that was, a little more uniform than choppy. At the time, it was very choppy. And a couple years after that, I was going through some things, and I did a therapeutic intensive where I learned what it means to have a voice. And they said, I love this. They said, your voice is your real thoughts and your real feelings together. And that really gave a lot of texture, help to me, like put some flesh on it rather than just communicating from the head. To say, what are my real feelings about something too? And so it's been kind of a twisty, turny journey to be at the place I am now, which I feel like I'm probably the most honest now that I've been my whole life. And I've got some other things I've written for the business world that are a bit more logical, which is how they think, so that's fine. But I'm going to rewrite those in more of a empathetic, emotional tone in probably the next year or two. So yeah, it's been a hard, rocky journey to learn to be honest. But I think you get to the point where you just get too tired, like of all the presentation. And so yeah, I'm happy with the place I'm at now. And there's a current book project actually that relates to this. I had it's about current project is about midlife, and I had a agent and a publisher interested. And just a few weeks ago, I came to the realization that they were taking the project in a direction that didn't fully represent who I was. And so I pulled the project. And it was so close to getting to that level that a lot of people want to get to. but I decided this is not representing me in a way that's fully me, my real voice. And I'm getting comfortable enough in my own skin to say I would rather take it and risk maybe self-publication again, rather than sell it to somebody who would make it something that's not representative of who I am.
That's a bold move. It speaks to this idea of platform, doesn't it?
Hmm.
In a voice, which a lot of ministry is about,
Yeah.
your platform and a voice and an audience. And you've been in that role as a both presenting coach and as a pastor and as a um, ministry leader and
Hmm.
a trainer of leaders with
Hmm.
church planting network.
Hmm.
Um, what was your what's been your relationship to your voice and a platform as you come into this season of your life?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. What I have, what I've decided, it's hard to kind of explain kind of what has happened, but what I think I've decided has happened is a lot of points of my exhaustion in my life. I've had two major points, one when I was about 37 and one when I was 44. And I think those points were directly related to me trying to tend to what I thought was a platform instead of being true to who I was and how I was changing. And so I became really divided. Um, in recent years, as I've been digging into my own story in terms of my ethnicity, um, it's probably been about 3 years, and I've been exposed to a lot of really interesting books and a lot of interesting words that I never knew were real words, but that made a lot of sense to my experience. And in particular, the word colonization. I knew what that word meant in terms of history, but I didn't understand what it meant in terms of how I had only, I feel like maybe I was only able to present an aspect of myself with the quote platform, like the evangelical part as an example, the part that's really good at strategizing and telling people about Jesus. And that's a part, but it's not the whole of who I am. Um, or the really open, you know, curious coaching part of me, which is what I do for work. And and those are all aspects of me, but they're not the whole of who I am. And so it has been interesting to come to a place where I'm starting to see probably what my real platform is for the first time in my life. And it doesn't seem like it's going to be as big as it has been in the past. And I'm actually okay with that. It's kind of a relief because I really want to spend time with people who are resonating with the message or the story that I have instead of me feeling obligated, which I have in the past, to kind of communicate to an expectation of what I think people want. Um, my good friend Jeff Vanderstelt, he told me once he went on an overseas trip with a bunch of online influencers. These are people have like millions of followers on the socials, and they were at this meeting. Like I don't know what they were doing there. I don't know what the event was, but all of them were invited, and he was the oldest one there. And at the time, I think he might have been in his mid to late 40s. And they just took him aside and they were like, Jeff, we don't know what the heck we're talking about. Why are people following us? And I think, well, good on them because they were honest about it. But I think it just speaks to the dynamic we have today with quote influencers. I mean, you just don't know what their real life is like and who they're actually talking to and what they're actually doing on the ground, or if it's just a bunch of hype that's out there in the air for a presentation. And I think that anybody who has a sort of platform falls prey to that, thinking like you've got to play to the numbers online or the numbers at an event as opposed to being you with the real people in your real life. And I've always wanted to go more in that direction, but I have kind of given myself to the temptation of like, oh, let's grow something rather than saying, no, my real family, my real friends, my real people in my community with my real voice, which is my real thoughts and my real feelings, and letting that be what I'm doing, what I'm known for. It's a much more pleasurable way to live too.
Yeah, well, speaking of being more true to your voice and true to what your experiences and kind of really graduating beyond the dualism or like the pressure of those expectations to always be up for or managing the expectations of others in how you have a voice.
Hmm.
Um, in your bio, and just knowing you, just out of our mentoring relationship and our friendship, um, these words feel like they're very true to who you are. I'd like to just have you riff on these a little bit.
Hmm.
The first set of words is entering the human struggle, vulnerability. Let's just stop there.
Hmm.
What is it about that has given you permission in this season of your life to go there? Give voice to your own vulnerability with the human struggle as a
Hmm.
leader.
Strangely enough, I don't know if I've ever been asked that question before, but I think that it's it's the lexicon of suffering in my life gives me far more content to pull from than you know all the theological knowledge or all the corporate knowledge or all the church knowledge. Um, and I think that at this phase in my life, it's strange, it gives, I think, a lot of meaning to what seems to be in scripture a lot about the weak things of the world being used to shame what is strong. And I have just, maybe it's the persona, like a persona of someone who knows things that you just can't maintain it, unless you start being honest about your real story and where you really came from. And like when I work with a group, whether it's ministry leaders or corporate leaders, I'll often start by telling just a little bit of my story. And I'll tell them about, just the dysfunction in my home that I grew up with, what it was like being a mixed race kid in a town that was predominantly white American, and how I had to divide parts of myself in order to feel like I was accepted and fit in. And so I'll say, hey, by show of thumbs, like this, or this, how much more do you trust me now based on what I just told you? And all the thumbs go up like this, like way up into the sky. Because that's how it works, it's just the way we're wired as people, like, oh, this person is safe, as opposed to the other way, which is someone who shows up all put together and maybe we don't have the words for it, but they just don't feel as safe. They might be inspiring in some way, but I'm not sure that people would feel safe around them. So I just feel like I have a lot to pull from there when it comes to the struggle of the human experience.
Thank you for that. Um, you've given a lot of volume to that in your book, Caverns,
Hmm.
in that exploration of tending to your mom in her long, slow fight, illness unto death, and then the grief process and that. And you've also told a bit about your story of like just physically melting down because
Hmm.
ministry seasons of pressure.
Yeah.
And why don't you speak to how recognizing yourself in that poverty of soul, poverty of body, blessed are the poor in spirit, for
Hmm.
theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And how did you find resiliency in like to embrace the kind of change that was inviting you to pivot from here to there?
Hmm.
What was it like to find that kind of resilience or change?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the resiliency question is rooted really in my childhood. I grew up with a dad who was from Peru and was really an angry person, rage, a lot of rage. And so I grew up just watching a nonstop argument. And, there are other painful things going on in my home. Um, so I just developed this capacity at a young age to just wait for the craziness to pass. And, by the time I got to 36 or 37, the first time I had a physical meltdown, um, my body was like, I can't do this anymore. This is after my mother died. And I started forgetting things. I started getting lost. Couldn't remember my kids' names, where the dishes were at. I mean, just really forgetting just my way around the basics of life. And so that's how I moved from California to Tennessee, and took a couple months to slow down. And I thought that was sufficient at the time. Ended up, about a year and a half later, planting another church, and was just totally convinced this one was from a healthier place. And and then, about 6 years later, it happened again. The physical manifestations, chest pain. I was thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to make it to 44. I spent the months leading up to the new year when I was 43 years old, I think, or 44, I don't remember, something around those years. But I spent those months updating my will, um, writing farewell letters to my family, um, and I ended up pulling myself away from the church that we had planted because there were some conflicts going on. I was being pulled into, and I didn't feel like my body could handle it. And it was like my body was saying, every time this stuff comes up, we're going to send you a major pain. And the chest pain was so bad I thought I was going to die. And so I put myself through a lot of intensives and had to change my diet, a lot of counseling, spiritual direction, and other things. And through a lot of that work, found myself starting to calm down. And so I think that's a long answer to say I think a lot of it had to do with my body just sending me these signals, we're done with this. And I heard an interview with Jim Carrey once where he talked about depression. And you guys may have seen this, but he said, depression is your body's way of saying, F you, we don't want to play this character anymore. Have you heard that before? But I think that's what was happening with me, was my body was saying, we don't want to play this character anymore that you're doing. The one who's got it in control, who's always calm and steady, who's got answers, who's got direction. And I couldn't afford to not listen. Um, so I stepped away from all those things and took a good, I mean, probably a year to allow myself to get to a more settled position. Like I thought this was my normal baseline of where I live, and it turns out my normal baseline is more like here. And so I think I'm at a healthier baseline now, but I can thank my body for exhausting me. Thank you, body.
Yes. Oh, that's a whole beautiful awareness, right? The integration of or, the embodiment question, especially for those of us that have been trained to live up here in our head,
Hmm.
even from head head to heart is one movement, and it sounds like you did that work, right? But then head to heart to integrate it into the body, that actually there's information here that's talking to me. And if I settle into an embodied spirituality in an embodied life, I can pay attention to things that it's telling me, whether I'm living towards health or in a healthy way, in an integrated way, rather than a disintegrated way.
Hmm.
And my body's gonna talk to me about that.
Yeah.
And we're trained to press through,
Hmm.
and ignore it. And some people are better than others, and thank God for a generation where that awareness is right in front of us. There's a lot of good resources now that are helping us pay attention to an embodied spirituality.
Yeah.
But wow, what a hard a couple of crisis seasons to get you to actually you didn't probably have a choice to pay attention.
No. Oh my goodness, no. I didn't, and I'm so thankful that my wife is her primary work is trauma and as a counselor, and so we had a lot of talks about what the body was doing, and thankfully I've got a great relationship with my doctor, and I was like, hey, what's going on here? And he was able to help me see some simple things that I missed. One is that I wasn't breathing properly. I was taking shallow breaths. I was holding my breath a lot, so my heart wasn't getting enough oxygen. I learned about how for all of us, but some of us are more sensitive to caffeine and the production of cortisol in the brain. So we're producing this fight or flight energy with drinking coffee, and especially too much. I wasn't drinking too much. It's just my natural personality's up here, so coffee is making it go kind of off the charts. And so I integrated cacao instead, which produces serotonin in the brain. And I've also adopted various breathing practices in the morning. So I spend about a half an hour in the quiet with some deep breathing exercises every morning now to activate my parasympathetic nervous system as opposed to my sympathetic. So I'm in this restful zone as opposed to a fight or flight zone. So I couldn't have made the transition without all those great people in my life, but it was definitely the body saying, we're done.
Chris, I just wanted to make room if you have anything that's popped up as a question or comment.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I had, David, and you just addressed it just a little bit at the end here, but what your experiences were like in terms of making these changes to find your voice in the communities around you. Like, especially if you're working in church world or if you're working with, the corporate world. Like, what was that experience like as you started to want to use your own voice and then also the slowing down?
Hmm.
How did you kind of experience that?
Well, at first it felt really isolating because I felt like I was abandoning a lot of my friends or people I'd led to faith, who were part of our church, because I had sort of defined my place in the relationship to my connect to my usefulness, and I didn't know that's what I had done. But with the stepping away and the stillness, I was able to say, "Hey, wait a minute. this is why I'm feeling so guilty, is I'm not able to swoop in and save some people with some issues that I see are happening. But the interesting thing is, a lot of the friends and people I led to faith ended up, after sort of figuring out, oh, who's David now, being able to ask me questions and step in. And so the sad thing about it is that the church we started after we stepped away, the leadership that was there's a lot of conflict that they couldn't navigate. And so the whole place melted down and people started stepping away. And eventually, within a few months, the church was not existent anymore. And, but the reason I throw that in there is because a lot of the friends we were close to and the people we led to faith, we're still close to. It's like we as ministry leaders, we tell ourselves this story that if we lose that 501c3 or the organization of the meetings that we call church, if we don't do that, then we're gonna lose everything. And it's just not true. I mean, if you have developed real relationships and friendships, they'll still be with you long after a website is gone. And many of those people that were part of that church are still with us, and we still have a little micro church that meets in our home. And those have been really great friends who have been really gracious to hold space for me as I've been changing from being the leader and multiplier of groups to just one of the people. And that's a relief. It is such a relief. And, back to this word colonization that I used earlier, I think it relates to this, Chris, because, a colonized view of Christianity is that we have to create sameness everywhere we go. That's what that means. Like, let's mow down and destroy what doesn't look like sameness. And no one would say it that bluntly, but that's what it is. I mean, if you look at the history of indigenous peoples, my ancestors were Peruvian, and that's what Pizarro did. It's the same thing up here in North America with what Columbus did and what the supposed missionaries did. And it's this belief that if things are diverse, then God isn't here, because if God was here, it would all look the same. And what's interesting about our current dynamic with our microchurch is we have people there from nominal Catholic background, from Mormon background, from no Christian background to fundamentalist Baptists to Seventh-day Adventists, people from all these different backgrounds. And we're just so at peace to hear one another's stories. We just call it the common background because we all have the same background in that it's broken and flawed. But there's also some interesting stuff to learn there. But yeah, anyway, so as we stepped away, those friends remained, and the diversity. If I can be a diverse person, other people can be diverse people, and that's created just a beautiful community that we're a part of. And I look forward to our gatherings and the things we do because they're fun. We tell good stories. We're honest about things. It's way different than trying to create, some meeting with an agenda to take people from A to B to make some decision, which is the evangelical way. So yeah, that's a roundabout way to answer, how that was to step away as a leader.
Anything else, Chris, that
Um, I guess one of the other questions I had, and um, if you're comfortable answering this, but what are some of the gifts? Just as a mom, I'm thinking of like, this is probably a big change of life that you went through, but also probably your family's gone through. And so I
Hmm.
was just wondering if you like, what are some of the fruit that maybe that you're seeing even in now your kids in this different way of being life?
Hmm.
You're comfortable answering that question.
Yeah, I am. I mean, we've always been a really open family, so the kids had some like furrowed brows when I was explaining what was happening, but it was normal for them, for their dad to be honest about things. I think probably the biggest difference has been with my wife and I. And this, I hope, will be helpful for any ministry leaders watching because
Can you
my,
just say who your kids are and their ages?
yeah, my daughter Anna turns 21 in a few days, and she's in college up in Boston. My son Isaac is 17. And so these changes I'm telling about have only been the last 3 years or so. So they've grown up their whole lives with church planting, with missional communities, and my daughter's more extroverted, so it's normal for her to be like, "Hey, when's the party?" And my son's like, "When's the party?" And he wants to go away to his room and close the door. But they're both used to people though and can talk to anybody, which is great. Um, but my wife, she struggled with depression for many years. And so she had a real awareness, more than me, with her lack of capacity. I was sort of coasting on personality, and she was just exhausted from just being a depressed person. And so she is not depressed anymore, but she, a few months before I stepped away officially, she had said, "I just can't do this anymore." She was like, "I'll still gather with our missional community, but I just can't do the Sunday gatherings and the meetings and all that." And I was like, "That's fine, that's okay." And eventually, when I made the decision, um, it really opened up some neat conversations for my wife and I. And, back to the colonization theme, with with anybody who has pain or struggle, if you're a part of kind of this happy clappy, culture or there's answers for everything, then a person with real pain just doesn't belong there because there's no answers. It's not a clean path. And my wife, she really was a trooper and tried and had ups and downs in her journey, but she just came to the end of it. Her own, Jim Carrey moment where she was like, "I just don't want to do this anymore." And when we stepped away, officially, both of us, it was really great because it gave us a lot of months to reflect on our faith and where we're really at and what we believed about our identity as followers of Jesus and what the church looked like for us. And it brought us probably for the first time in, my goodness, 15 years of church planting to a real place of unity. We were unified at first going into it, but I don't think my wife knew the toll it would take on her as a depressed person. She didn't know she was depressed at the time. Um, and so, yeah, the stepping away has brought us to a real beautiful place of unity, because I think in many ways ministry is a team sport, if you could call it that. You kind of have to be united as a family, especially if you're in the church planting world, because so much is in your home. And so we came to this place of unity that I think is really beautiful. And it's created for us an opportunity to have a lot more open conversations with our family, with the kids, because even though Anna's not in the house anymore, the conversations we're able to have now when the family is all there, like we were just all gathering with our little micro church this last Friday. And I asked Anna to share with our group, which I think we had maybe 15 people in the home this last week, and just about college. And I was asking her, "How have you grown? What's been the hardest thing? How has your love expanded or shifted? How is your understanding about God looking these days?" Just questions like that. And, she was able to answer from a place of honesty for where a 20-year-old would be. But the cool thing is the answers she was giving were probably closer to what people these days in their early 30s might be giving. Because what people do these days is they turn off their real feelings, their real questions for the sake of fitting in. And because we've created an environment where the questions belong, the pain belongs, the exhaustion belongs, it's enabled my daughter at 20 years old to be able to say things, yeah, like, I know there's a higher power out there. Um, and I believe that the world is about learning to love. And I'm learning how that looks, how people receive love differently. And it's not like I think they should receive. And that's like, I think developmentally appropriate, but we stunt people in the church. We stunt people for the sake of them fitting in, for us looking good. And so they have to, quote, deconstruct, which means pull apart all the things that we piled on top of them, rather than allowing them to develop appropriately according to their life stage and their age. So my wife and I have had a little bit of that to do, of the quote deconstruction, because we allowed ourselves to be piled on with some stuff. So I'm hoping we can avoid some of that with our kids. It looks like we are so far, but it's been a great move for the family, and we're still following Jesus, and we've got all these people in our home still. It just looks a lot more relaxed than it used to.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for
Great
asking that.
questions, Chris. Thank you. Love this. Yeah, I want you to riff a little bit on this, a little bit more about the integration season you're in. Somebody who has blended ethnicity,
Hmm.
telling about midlife, what invitations are there in your becoming,
Hmm.
and because really you entered a season of transition a bit ago, almost forced upon you by a life crisis in your health, and then also a church crisis, which often are instrumental for people to consider pivots, right, in ministry leadership roles. And what's it look like, the healing path towards integration?
I think a big one has to do with embracing joy. Um, what I did for many years was I went back to all those trauma loops that were in my head, the stories that just kept going over and over and over again. And I came to a realization when I was on a retreat that you don't heal that way. You actually can't heal what's happened. Just can't. And it sounds like,
A lot of remuneration of, or rehearsing
yeah,
examples, yeah,
yeah.
unless there's some sort of agency or some sort of other sort of introduction of a new experience, right? It's almost
Hmm.
like counter that experience,
Hmm.
a new experience, so that it can rewire you, you'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I'll show you something. I keep on my desk an image of myself as a kid. That's little David right there. What do you think? Same me right there. And I keep that image on my desk to remind myself that I'm still this person in many ways. And for a long time, I tried to heal what happened to him, which I can't do, as opposed to remembering, oh, I am still him. And the way that I embrace the healed David is by getting into, well, what is David really like? Um, it's a more of an appreciative inquiry, approach to health. And oh, you know what I like? I like music. I like guitars. I like trails. I like moss. I like old cars. I like hanging out with guys with white hair. Joe. um, instead of all this crap that I thought I had to like in order to make a place for myself in this world. Don't get me wrong, I like speaking in front of people. I like doing all those things. I like making money. I just don't like them anymore as much as I like the other things that are more true about me. I'll take a walk in the woods any day of the week over working with an organization and design their leadership development programs. Like even when I'm done with this call today, I'm going to go with a longtime friend of mine who's asked me to take him on a 2-day retreat to work through some stuff. And I'm trying new things in my business where it's take it to your prayer closet and pay what you can. And it's a freely you've given, freely you've received, freely it's free exchange model of money. And I'd way rather do that than some of the other stuff. Um, learning that healing comes from embracing who I really was created to be from the young age, as opposed to all the other stuff that I piled on. Um, but also that it involves embracing all the parts of who I am. That is true from like an internal family systems perspective. Like I've got the leader part, I've got the artist part, I've got the organized part. It's like the movie Inside Out. Um, but it also has to do. I found a lot of stability in recent years by digging into my ethnic story, my Peruvian story. I went to one intensive where the facilitator was half Iranian and half white American, raised in Mississippi. And he took me aside and he said, "Hey, David, there's probably some real stuff in your story that you could explore that would help you get steady. I know because I've lived it." And I'm so thankful because he said I would have never thought it. And as I went and shared my story in this one intensive, he was able to point out these are all the elements of racism in your story where you have turned off this part of yourself in order to be accepted. But the problem is what's being accepted is not really you, so that's why you don't feel like you're known. You're presenting a part of who you are. And so I've been reading and talking to people in my family about the Peruvian story. My grandfather was a trilingual Inca. He spoke Spanish, Quechua, Aymaran. My mother was from a coal mining town in Virginia called Big Stone Gap, Virginia. But as I've dug in to learn about the Peruvian part of my story, I've learned different frameworks for journeys and for healing in life that are way more robust than what we have in the West, even in Christianity. Some of these beliefs preceded Christianity like by 4,000 years. So, and just to give you like one of them that's meant a lot to me, I learned about something called the Inca medicine wheel. Most indigenous cultures have a medicine wheel, and it's, if you can imagine, it's directional, north, south, east, west. And the Inca believed that people needed to take 4 journeys in their lives. One journey was to the north, and that was represented by the condor, and it was to gain a vision for your life, because they believed that the condor was the messenger between earth and heaven. And then, so that was the north, the condor, and the south was the snake. And they believed that we needed to learn to shed our past like a snake sheds its skin. And it's interesting because if you don't understand the different views on things culturally, you'll think weird things. Like from the Christian framework, oh no, the snake, that's evil. But actually in the Inca framework, the snake was actually a healing agent, an agent of growth. You're shedding something like skin, shedding your past. So it was the condor, the snake, and then to the west was the puma. I think it was a puma or the jaguar, but I think it was a puma. But that was to face death, so you're no longer afraid of it, which means face what you're afraid of. So what are your fears? And then to the east, oh man, I can't believe I'm forgetting this. To the east is the hummingbird. That's what it was. And it was to gain the wisdom from your ancestors. So I think I mixed up the directions a little bit, but the ideas are the same. And it's all about these ideas of we need to take these journeys to become whole and steady people. And so I have been working at taking each of these journeys in my own way, like asking myself, what am I afraid of? How can I face that? What do I need to shed? How can I do that? What can I do ceremonially even to shed that? So I've been, learning the beauty of ceremony because we don't have a lot of those in our culture. What's the vision from my life? What's the wisdom of my ancestors I need to learn? And those have helped me, I think, become a much more integrated person. And I feel like a lot steadier of a presence when I'm with people as well. Yeah, I'm excited about that subject. I could talk about that one for a long time.
Yeah. What's beautiful is all these things that you're talking about, they have this core kind of spiritual direction conversation about who is your true self, but that true self is in God
Hmm.
and can be found and can be known as your most authentic self coming forth.
Hmm.
And it's full of joy, and joy can lead you to this discovery of this is this is who I am, both in God and in my skin and in my history.
Yeah.
And you redeem your family of origin story. You bring it with you as part of your integrated whole self into
Hmm.
into the new season. And this is such midlife stuff,
Hmm.
from going from doing to being. And it's
Yeah.
kind of where a spiritual director starts to enter that space. And I'd say the majority of my clients right now are in this conversation.
Hmm.
Not so much, what's the trouble in the house or the church or this or that. I mean, those things are there, but it's more of this like, who am I becoming? And in light of that, oh my goodness, what is mine to do now?
Hmm.
And I think that's a lot of been our conversation in our relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the things you're mentioning are so important. Every one of these, uh, is a beautiful spiritual direction exploration. What's
Hmm.
the life? How are you shedding things from the past, and who are you becoming? How do you face death and the mortality of your life, and how is that informing how you know?
Hmm.
And then what's the wisdom of the elders or the wisdom tradition
Yeah.
we can drop into that is going to help us uh, understand what's truly valuable and what we should be living for.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
really
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe one more thing to add, Joe, is the great thing about spiritual direction through the years has been the space to have a voice that says, that's a good place to be. Like that's good exploration you're doing. That's good work. And it's very healing, to have that. I don't think we ever stop, needing that voice of affirmation, like, hey, you're on the right track. Hey, good job. And for me in particular, in exploring some of the things I've explored, I mean, I brought some pretty off the wall stuff to you. And for you to be able to say, okay, like let's learn about this, let's explore it. Um, which is like super healing, like, hey, you're old enough and mature enough to know where you need to go, and let's trust that. And in that, beautiful windy road, it's brought me to a really great place. I feel like it's only been in the last few months where I truly feel like I've shed some stuff that is enabling me to make the next click. Age wise, I've got more work to do, of course, but internally speaking, I feel the calmest and most steady and most secure I've felt my whole life right now.
That is a pretty profound statement for anybody to make at any given moment.
I mean, the way I've shared with people is all that trauma, all that counseling therapeutic work was kind of like a body of work.
Yeah.
And there's always stuff that's going to happen in life. There's always new things that'll come up from your past. But in terms of the body of work of all that pain, I feel like I've been able to close the lid on it and say, that's enough for now. There will be more that'll come up later, but that's enough. I have no desire to look at any of that right now. I feel like I've looked enough and a lot of it's been healed. And I'm peacefully, open heartedly moving ahead, saying, all right, what's next? I'm open. I'm open here instead of feeling the anchor of being pulled back by all that pain.
How long was that season?
9
That,
years.
yeah. So that's no joke, right? That's almost
Right.
a decade of your life that you hit, a couple crises, well, almost at least three.
Mm-hmm.
Got to reinvent the conversation with your wife, which is its own huge work of
Mm-hmm.
discovery. You've got to reinterpret who you are, and then what's emerging, give some definition to, and even try to locate, yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is where I can stand now,
Yeah.
confident.
Yeah.
But to actually open your hands like you did naturally just now
Mm-hmm.
and make that kind of a statement, I feel the most grounded and whatever words you use, peaceful and centered than I have my whole life.
Yeah.
Beautiful work.
Yeah.
And it had therapeutic stuff, it had embodiment, it had spiritual direction,
Mm-hmm.
it had life transition stuff. It meant reinventing your public ministry life,
Mm-hmm.
which is hard.
Yeah.
It's a really hard thing to go through,
Mm-hmm.
but it was for the sake of holistic health, a healthy and whole life, which is held in the the goodness and grace of God shared with us in Jesus Christ and mediated in our bodies by the Holy Spirit, dwelling within us, bringing the abundant life forward so we can flourish.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's
Yeah.
the of the Spirit that's always trying to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you for sharing your story with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for journeying with me over the last couple of years. You've seen it. I've become a lot less anxious of a person.
Yeah.
I mean, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's been wonderful. You started writing songs again.
That's
So
right. Yeah.
think about finding your voice another way.
Uh-huh.
Songwriter and a
Uh-huh.
musician. Myself, I love that about
Mm-hmm.
your discovery of that part of yourself again. It's so fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, David, thanks again. What a joy to have this interview. And yeah, you can find David's writings on our website, souloftheshepherd.org, in the library there. What series he wrote from his blog. David also hosts a podcast called
How people grow.
All People Grow. And you can find all things David Achata at davidachata.com.
That's
It,
right.
it has everything there, one-stop shop to
Yeah.
just all things David Achata. All right. Thanks again, David. Have a
You're
great
welcome. Thanks, Joe.